The two biggest additions to HTML 2.0, to me at least, were image maps and forms. With forms, it would connect to some sort of scripting on the back end of the server. In addition to HTML 2.0 being released in 1995, JavaScript and PHP were as well. JavaScript allowed interactivity and worked on the client side. PHP could work on the back end, and it could provide some interactivity as well, but it also allowed doing things like storing information, sending data, taking the responses from a form and doing something with it, like an email contact form or maybe a guest book or something like that. So we're going to have to do this sort of in parts because otherwise it will be really long. So first, let's look at just the HTML aspect, and then we'll talk about the PHP aspect, which, yeah, that's a different language. But it'll be okay. I'll walk you through it. It'll be fine. So I'm going to open a new document in text edit. We'll just start a basic HTML page. We'll include all of your basic opening tags. And I've decided that we're going to make a feedback page because that's sort of like a contact page, right? I'll go into more exactly why in a little while. So inside of here, maybe we just use a simple heading tag, and we can just use that same line there. Maybe capitalize that word. All right, so forms work a little differently. You have essentially an opening tag for the form and a closing tag for the form, and then you have a bunch of additional elements inside. Inside of the form element, we end up having a bunch of different input tags. And there is a big variety of them, and we're not going to go over all of them, but we'll play with a few. So for each input, we have to define a type. So I'll add a type attribute for each. And on the first one, this will be text. And it needs a name. So if we're asking for feedback, the user's going to put information into like a series of boxes, right? And they're going to hit a send button. That information goes to the server, and whatever name is used to label that input box, that's going to help the server know what to do with that data. So maybe this is username or something. Maybe we do password, and this is a little different. This could be secret, right? Because passwords are secrets. All right, and then maybe, you know what, for this last one, we'll just say text for right now, and we'll call this comments, right? And let's see what it actually looks like so far. We could call this feedback.html, and we'll save it, and we'll open it. All right, so obviously there's some issues here. We do have our boxes here, and they do work, but there's no labels. So the names are invisible to the user. They're there only for the server to know which fields they're coming from, and then thus what to do with it depending on how you code it. So how do we fix this? And also notice that we don't know what I typed here because that's the password type. So it also might be nice if I maybe broke these up a little bit. So let's go back and modify our code. So in between each of these, I could add in like a line break, and then maybe I actually like, you know, perhaps provide my user with some information. Like, all right, so what's your name? And maybe tell me a secret or something. Oh, let's put a line break up here too. And then comments, questions, whatever you might want to ask them. All right, and if we save it and we reopen this, it should look a little bit better. There we go. So that's starting to look a little bit more the way you might expect, right? Maybe you actually want to give them some choices. So like you could say like, how do you rate our page? But then do you just want to leave a big blank, or do you actually want to like have maybe like a 1 to 5 scale or something like that? So we can do that. Now it looks a little different. I'm not going to put it at the very bottom because I would think comments and questions would go at the very bottom. So I'm going to put in a little bit of space here. And we're going to put in those, they call them radial buttons. How would you rate our page? These work a little different. They are inputs, but we end up having to use quite a few of them. We end up using one for each of the little dots. So if I'm doing a 1 to 5 scale, I'm going to end up having 5 of these inputs. And the type is radio, and we need a name. Now the name is going to be the same across all of them because the data that it's associating which one they click is the same regardless. If we're saying how do you rate the page, regardless of which one they choose, it's related to that rating. So they're all going to use the same name. So we can actually copy and paste this whole thing for all 5 of these. There's actually one more thing that we need though. So in the other ones, they actually type something in, right? So it takes whatever they typed in and it sends it to the server. These, there's nothing to type. They just click on it. So how does it know what to send the server if it's just a random circle? So each one of these also needs a value attribute. So this might be a 1, and that will be a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. So 2, 3, 4, 5. And we probably want a line break here, and maybe we say down here, like poor and great. And so if we save this, oh, hang on. Let's put a line break down there. So that way we have some separation between comments and the last button. If we save and we reopen, there we go. So we have these little buttons here. And we still have this down here. Now we might want a little bit more spacing because it's a little confusing to have the two like that without spacing in between. So I might want to add a little bit more line spacing now between them. When the form was a little bit shorter, it was less confusing. So we'll add it after each of those, and we can refresh this. There we go. I think that helps a little bit. Now there's other things that we can do to stylize this text to make it look better, of course, but that's not the focus here, so this is fine for now. Now this comments and questions box, that doesn't give me much room. If I'm really wanting decent feedback from a user, I probably want to make that box a little bit bigger. So how do I do that? It is still an input type element, but it actually isn't called input anymore. So this is going to be text area, and it needs a closing tag, unlike the other input tags. And it's going to need rows, and it's going to need columns, and it will also need a name. So the name can be comment still. The rows and columns are a number. So the larger they are, the larger your text area will be. So if we save this and rerun it, let's see if it looks fine still. There we go, so now it's a little bit bigger. And you can play with that to figure out how large you want yours to be. Now we have these little boxes here, right? Which it can only be one or the other. But what if we want little checkboxes, right? So we know that these are like choose one, right? This is choose one of these 5. With checkboxes, it can be like a yes or a no or whatnot. So maybe on here for comments or questions, maybe we would have some little checkboxes, and it's saying like, do you want us to contact you back? Can we use your comments as a testimonial? Something like that. So these are actually really similar to any of the others. Basically, it's the same more or less structure as the others, but with the type set as a checkbox. So maybe contact me. Maybe the name is contact and the value is contact me. And then we can close it and we can actually put whatever we want after it, right? Oftentimes when someone sees a checkbox, they expect there to be like text afterwards, right? So we'll stick with that same standard. So I would like a return email or something like that. And maybe we have a couple of these. So you have like that, like maybe this is permission and testimonial. You can use my comments for marketing, and I don't know, one more for something silly, I guess. And if we save and we open this up, there we go. So we've got checkboxes, and multiple boxes can be checked. And we've got the radial buttons, we've got comments, we've got a password field, a bunch of different things. Now we need a submit button, right? So submit button's pretty easy to do. So it's input type equals submit, and the value is submit. Oh, input type. All right. If we would save and we refresh, there we go. We've got that submit button there, although it doesn't do anything. So the issue with the submit button is right now there's no like code telling it what to actually do with this. To actually make it do something, we have to do more than HTML. We have to use like JavaScript or PHP. So we'll talk about that in the next video because it can't be done with just HTML alone. Maybe a reset button, because like what if you like had all of these filled out and then you realize you typed something wrong, and instead of clicking each one off, you just want to reset. That's pretty easy to do. So similar to the submit button, it's input type equals reset, value equals reset. And if we save and we open, now we have a reset button and a submit button. Now notice that submit is spelled here with a capital S and reset is with a lowercase s. Those values on there are these values right here. I could actually just type junk, but that wouldn't be very nice to the user because then they wouldn't know what that button would do, and they type a bunch of stuff in and then their stuff would disappear, right? So like, you know, be nice to your users. And one other thing that we can do, so like some of these have values and some of them don't. We can actually include values in like the text fields. What that does is it's sort of like helper text or like default text. So if we type value here, this could be like John Doe or Jane Doe if we wanted. And if we save it and we reopen that, there we go. Now it's like pre-filled out. So that's how you can provide some like default expected text in there if you wanted to. I suppose you could actually just include the questions as actual values in these and they could replace it, but that might be a little weird and some users might not be sure if they were to type next to it or under it or whatnot. So now, just like with providing like a default here, we could also say too, like, hey, I think our page is pretty great and we would like you to think it's great too. So we could suggest which one they choose by marking this as checked. So if we reopen this, now that one starts as checked by default because that's what we told it. We can do the same thing with these checkboxes. So like maybe I put this as checked and this is checked, and if we save and we refresh, there we go, then by default they are checked as well. So that's the basis of how to set up a form on the HTML aspect. As far as actually getting it to do something, that's going to take a little bit more time and we're going to have to look at another language. So we will continue this on the next video.